It's no secret that old Dillboy is down to his last few fights. He's chasing that golden number 50, just like old Moneybags did, and that final bout is shaping up to be quite the spectacle. Rumors are swirling. Francis Ngannou in Africa, maybe a trilogy fight with Dillian Whyte, and even the name of a rather out-of-sorts Deontay Wilder has been thrown into the mix. And you know what? I'd be up for that one. A few years back, when Wilder was sending people into orbit, it might not have been the best matchup for someone like Dillboy, who tends to take his fair share of punishment, while Wilder was never quite good enough. To topple the very best, he certainly had enough firepower to handle Dillboy back then, but now, I'd say they're on a much more level playing field. Regardless, fight number 50 is bound to be a big one. Memorable, lucrative, and a well-earned farewell for a man who's been a true warrior of the sport. And let's be honest, the payday will do him good since, apparently, he can only afford half a haircut these days. Just have a look. But before all that, we've got Otto Wallin. Yeah, okay. How Dillboy has managed to make this 10-rounder a headline act is beyond me, but here we are. So, fight number 49, this Saturday, pits him against a guy best known for taking Fury the distance and giving him a nasty cut before getting absolutely wrecked by AJ. No offense to Wallin, but there's not a whole lot else to put on his highlight reel. He's a solid fighter, no doubt, but this bout doesn't have that chaos, that drama, that needle of a classic Dillboy scrap. And dare I say it, it lacks that knockout anticipation we usually associate with him. That being said, here's the problem. If Dillboy wants that milestone 50th fight, he needs to win this one. And stylistically, Wallin isn't exactly the ideal opponent for him. We'll get into that shortly, but first, Dillboy comes into this off that big win over Joe Joyce, which caught a lot of people off guard. I mean, I never imagined he'd outpoint the juggernaut in a million years, but here we are. As for Wallin, he squeezed in a quick fight last July against some bloke named Hardy, winning in the first round. But in terms of a real test, his last big outing was that absolute demolition job by AJ in December 2023, which, let's be honest, wasn't much of a shocker. Wallin's a tricky one. On paper, you see a capable southpaw with a few solid wins. Just below world level. He gave Fury a tough night, so he must be a handful, right? But then came that AJ fight, where he got completely outclassed, bullied for 5 rounds, and then decided he'd had enough. That performance drained all the momentum from his career and, harsh as it sounds, it dampened a lot of fan interest in him. People are now questioning both his skill and his heart, something Dillboy himself brought up in their face-off. If you haven't seen that face-off with the always brilliant Dev Sani, do yourself a favor and check it out. It's absolutely top tier. Dillboy wasn't shy about his thoughts either. What do you think of this guy? Dev asked. He's a good fighter, a solid fighter, but he's missing one thing. He's got no heart. Dillboy fired back, and he's pulled this card before. He said the same thing about Joe Joyce last year. Told him he wasn't about that life. And whether that got in Joyce's head or not, we'll never know, but Dillboy walked away with the win. To be fair to Wallin, though, the criticism isn't completely justified. Yeah, AJ was all over him, but he never actually hit the canvas. He still had his wits about him. The only issue seemed to be a reported broken nose, which led him and his trainer to call it quits. So, that raises the real question. Is that a legitimate reason to pull out of a fight? Especially one at that level? Probably not. And an even better, would the great Derek Chisora ever throw in the towel after just 5 rounds when things aren't going his way? The answer to that is almost certainly not. And before you say it, yes, I know he retired in his second fight against Fury after 10 rounds, but that was purely down to exhaustion. Wallin, on the other hand, wasn't exhausted against AJ. To be fair, though, he did us all a favor by calling it a day because, let's be honest, that fight was mind-numbingly dull. Still, D-Boy had no problem calling him out for it, straight to his face. The day you step into that ring in front of the whole world, you should stand your ground and place your punches, he told Wallin. But instead, You took the easy way out, the safe way out. You didn't even trouble Anthony. And to be honest, I don't even understand what happened to you that day. You just froze. And from there, well, you won't be surprised to learn that D-Boy absolutely dominated the war of words. I told you, he said, watching Wallin squirm. You got upset, and I apologize for that. You shook my hand off like you knew the game, bro. The real highlight of the whole thing? Your sparring story? What happened when you sparred? We had good work, Wallin replied. Wasn't as long as I expected, but, the reason I left was because my manager was charging me 10 grand a week. D-Boy's eyes widened. Yeah, I got like $1,000 a week, Wallin admitted. Oops, big mistake. Well, if that's true, it wasn't my manager. I don't know who you're talking about. Ah, come on, Otto. He's winding you up, and you've fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. He's got you tied up in knots, mate. That's the magic of D-Boy. Unpredictable, sharp with words, and an absolute menace. Any up-and-coming fighter should take notes, because if you can even replicate a fraction of his charm, you'll build yourself one hell of a loyal fan base. And in the end, this whole exchange just proves Chisora's point, doesn't it? Wallin simply isn't cut from the same cloth. With complete ease, D-Boy has mentally unraveled him, leaving him totally flustered. You don't have it in you, Chisora declared. I've been in this game with countless fighters, and I can tell you don't have it in you. And in that ring, I'm going to break your heart. Now, all that back and forth aside, the real question is, was Wallin overrated before the AJ fight? Did we all get caught up in the hype from his bout with Fury a few years back? That's for you to decide. Personally, I'd say he's a solid European and fringe world-level contender, more than capable of giving fighters at this tier a tough night. But ultimately, he lacks the firepower to thrive at the elite level. So, in a way, his career path isn't all that different from D-Boy's, who has spent the last 10, 20, 100 years, or so it feels, floating in that same space. And on paper, that should make this fight relatively competitive. One thing that isn't competitive, though, is the level of opposition they've faced. D-Boy has been in there with the absolute best. Usyk, Tyson, Klitschko, Parker, you name. Granted, he's walked away from all of those fights with absolutely nothing. Not even a consolation prize. But regardless, he's been there. And that kind of experience can't be. Sure, here's the rewritten version with changed wording, while keeping the essence intact. Derek Chisora has always been a tough competitor, holding his own against top-tier opposition. On paper, it's easy to argue that Chisora is the more accomplished fighter and should secure the win without much trouble. However, the issue is that he's beginning to show signs of aging. At 41 years old, he's facing a younger and fresher Otto Wallin, who, at 34, certainly has the advantage in terms of youth. Had this fight taken place 5 or 6 years ago, the outcome would likely be clear-cut. But now, things aren't as straightforward. Wallin, at his best, can be quite mobile, using his footwork and boxing skills to keep his opponents at bay. Given how poorly he fared when trading blows with Anthony Joshua, it's unlikely he'll engage in heavy exchanges with Chisora either. Wallin doesn't possess fight-altering power, meaning his best strategy would be to box smartly, staying on the move and chipping away to earn a decision victory. We've already seen Wallin's most effective performances, such as against Gassiev, where he maintained discipline, relied on his jab, and outmaneuvered his opponent. This could spell trouble for Chisora. While he is stronger and vastly more experienced, his preferred style suits fights against heavy hitters, like Dillian Whyte or Joe Joyce, where he can go toe-to-toe in an all-out brawl. Wallin will likely use movement to his advantage, much like Chisora's previous frustrating encounters against Gerald Washington, Agat Kabayel, and Senad Gashi, fights where he struggled when forced to chase his opponent around the ring. At this stage in his career, that could be even more exhausting. If Wallin can avoid taking significant damage while outboxing Chisora throughout the fight, a decision win for the Swede wouldn't be surprising. Key factor will be whether Chisora can close the distance, cut off the ring, and land damaging shots, as Joshua did. One potential advantage for Chisora is that this fight is scheduled for 10 rounds rather than 12, allowing him to go full throttle without worrying about conserving energy in the later rounds. Then again, this shorter fight might benefit the younger Wallin instead. Ultimately, Chisora has historically been the better fighter. The wear and tear is catching up with him. This matchup seems like a tricky choice as a lead-up to his monumental 50th fight. That said, he clearly sees a weakness in Whyte, perhaps based on their past sparring sessions. Either way, it's set to be an interesting fight. What do you think? Drop your predictions below.